The invitation had smelled faintly of citrus and menace. Jonah Kessler knew it was a bad sign the moment he opened the shimmering envelope and a holographic ribbon sprang out, shouting in a language that sounded like a cross between a foghorn and interpretive beatboxing. By the time the translation chip clicked in, the message had already declared his full name, homeworld, approximate cholesterol level, and then warmly welcomed him to the royal union ceremony of His Radiance King, Voron of Siralivex and her supreme daughter Sarava the Undimmed. He should have said no. Should have sent one of the interns, or better yet, a diplomatic hologram programmed to nod politely and laugh when appropriate. But no, he was Jonah Kessler, cultural attaché to the Orion Expanse, which basically meant he was Earth's least threatening envoy. He'd once negotiated a ceasefire using only a ukulele and 3 unlicensed metaphors. That made him harmless, likable, and very available for wedding assignments that involved glowing food and awkward seating arrangements. His shuttle landed on Siralivex during their bright season, when the atmosphere shimmered with bioluminescent particles that clung to every exposed surface, including skin, clothing, and unfortunate facial hair. By the time Jonah reached the palace, he looked like a walking firework trying to attend a funeral. The palace itself was a monument to architectural bravado, 12 towers spiraling like question marks into the upper stratosphere, their outer walls alive with flowing script that morphed whenever someone important walked by. Jonah tried walking confidently. The walls insulted his posture. Inside, he was greeted by a man whose robes appeared to be stitched from fog and poor judgment. "You are the Terran?" the man asked, his long ears twitching with barely contained disdain. "Ambassador Jonah Kessler. But please, call me Jonah. Unless you've got a title for guy who eats too much at the buffet, in which case, that one works too." The robed man did not laugh. Sirali humor, Jonah recalled, was subtle, deeply symbolic, and often involved interpretive coughing. They led him through a procession of halls carved from memory stone, each wall retelling ancient victories via shifting images. Kings battling gravity whales, queens reshaping continents with a glance, diplomats turned into statues for accidentally sitting in sacred chairs. Jonah made a mental note to never sit again. Eventually, he was deposited in the grand reception chamber, where alien nobles hovered, some literally between conversation clusters, every one of them taller, shinier, and far more coordinated than Jonah. A Kairali woman approached carrying a tray of translucent cubes. Jonah grabbed one, chewed carefully, and immediately regretted it. "Ah, yes," the tray carrier said in a monotone. "Fermented clarity sponge. It will loosen your dreams for a week." "I have very fragile dreams," Jonah said, coughing politely into a napkin. "They're mostly about paperwork and losing my keys." There was a chime, not a sound, but a vibration in the bones, ceremonial, rhythmic, and a little like being politely electrocuted. All heads turned as the doors parted to reveal the king. Varun strode in flanked by armored attendants, his robes a constellation in motion, his ears long enough to make elves feel insecure. At his side, not quite behind, walked the princess, Sarava. She was less imposing than Jonah expected and far more terrifying. Her presence hit like a gravity shift. She wore armor that shimmered between states of matter, her hair coiled like black smoke pinned with silver, and her expression was the universal one for, "I could end you in 17 ways and still make my appointment." She made eye contact with Jonah. He gave a small, respectful nod. She tilted her head as if trying to identify a strange insect in her soup. Ceremony began. There were speeches, chants, something involving ceremonial sand being poured over robotic birds. Jonah clapped when others clapped, nodded when others nodded, and tried not to look too human. Then came the oracle, a being with no visible mouth, dozens of slowly blinking eyes, and a voice that felt like déjà vu. The oracle floated above the crowd and began to chant in Old Sirali, its words forming holographic script in the air. The room fell silent. Jonah shifted uncomfortably. His translator slug vibrated once, then stopped. His skin prickled. A symbol appeared above his head, a glowing, rotating triangle with a spiral core. It matched one carved into the floor, the ceiling, and, he noticed with growing horror, the throne. Everyone stared. The oracle's voice deepened. He is the Zaventel. Jonah looked behind him, then pointed to his own chest. Me? The oracle's eyes pulsed. The one foretold, the chosen mate of the royal bloodline. There was silence. Long, painful silence. Jonah cleared his throat. Listen, I think you've got the wrong... A roar of cymbals cut him off. The crowd erupted in song. Two guards lifted him bodily and carried him toward the dais, where Sarava stared at him with the expression of someone who'd just learned her spaceship had been married off without her consent. Jonah laughed nervously. Okay, wow, this is moving fast. Can we maybe start with dinner first? Or, I don't know, a coffee? Sarava stepped forward, her voice like velvet knives. You do not look like a prophecy. Most people say that, Jonah replied. I barely look like a competent adult. The king rose, arms wide. Let the trelling begin. Jonah blinked. Trelling? Trials, Sarava said flatly, to prove you're worthy. Of what? She stared him down. Of not being incinerated by tradition. Jonah swallowed. Somewhere deep in the back of his mind, a part of him began planning a very detailed and very sarcastic complaint to the Interplanetary Diplomatic Corps. Another part wondered if Siralivex had decent coffee. The crowd cheered. The floor opened. The trials had begun. Jonah awoke in a bed made of something that pulsed. It was soft, yes, but it also responded to his movements like a concerned parent. Every time he shifted, it adjusted with an almost offended sigh. The room was round, softly lit from above by a floating orb that occasionally emitted calming murmurs in what he could only guess was lullaby Sirali. For a culture so devoted to grandiose titles and trials of worthiness, they sure knew how to design a nap-worthy panic room. The door, a hexagonal sheet of liquid metal, melted aside as two attendants entered, each wearing outfits that looked like they'd been designed during a solar flare. One carried folded garments, the other held a tray of foods that looked suspiciously like geological samples. Neither spoke, but both nodded with the solemnity of funeral planners. Good morning, Jonah offered, accepting the garments. Or is it afternoon? Or second moonrise? Sorry, still getting used to your orbital situation. The tray bearer responded with a slight bow. Nutritional intake is advised before the first trial. Hydration will increase survival odds by 19%. That's encouraging, Jonah said, eyeing a green cube that wobbled when he looked at it. What about caffeine? Forbidden, the attendant said without hesitation. Okay, so this is how I die. The garments, as it turned out, were made of some nanofiber that adjusted to his size the moment he touched it. They clung in places he would have preferred they didn't, and pulsed faintly in a way that suggested sentience. Dressed like an intergalactic fitness instructor, Jonah was led through a series of corridors that gradually widened into a stadium-like chamber, carved from obsidian stone and humming with invisible energy. On one end stood Sarava, flanked by royal advisors. On the other, the oracle floated silently, its many eyes focused entirely on Jonah. The king's voice boomed from somewhere above, though Jonah couldn't see where he was. Begin the trelling. Wait, still not 100% clear on what that means, Jonah said, but no one responded. The floor shifted, literally. It rotated beneath his feet until he stood on a platform suspended over what looked like a lake made entirely of quicksilver. From its center rose a tree, though calling it a tree felt inaccurate. It shimmered with crystalline leaves. Its branches spiraled through 4 dimensions at once, and Jonah could swear it occasionally blinked at him. This is the trial of memory, Sarava said, her voice echoing without amplification. You will place your hand on the root. The tree will see your life. If it finds you worthy, it will let you go. And if it doesn't, it will keep you. Jonah stared at the blinking tree, then at Sarava. Any chance I can bribe it with snacks? You may try, she replied, completely straight-faced. Swallowing his growing anxiety, Jonah stepped forward and placed his hand on a root that rose to meet him. For a moment, nothing happened. Then he was pulled inward, not physically but mentally, into a swirling torrent of memories, thoughts, embarrassments, and that one dream he had in college involving a talking toaster and a failed audition. His life replayed itself, his childhood on Earth, complete with overly enthusiastic birthday clowns, his time at the academy, where he'd accidentally launched a professor's hover car into orbit, his first assignment to a trading outpost that turned out to be an active volcano. All of it, including the moment he first saw Sarava standing in the reception chamber like an armored goddess judging a pet contest. When he returned to himself, the platform was silent. The tree had retracted, pulsing slowly with a soft golden glow. "It has accepted you," the oracle intoned. "Great," Jonah said, legs trembling. "Do I get a sticker, or—" The floor spun again. He landed in a different chamber. This one smaller, intimate, and oddly comfortable, as though built by someone trying to imitate human lounges using only third-hand descriptions and mild vertigo. Sarava stood there, arms crossed, gaze unreadable. "Why do you keep making jokes?" she asked. "Habit, anxiety, a desperate need for approval. Pick one." "This is serious." "I noticed. There was a tree that tried to psychoanalyze me using metaphysical branches." She walked closer. Her armor today was less ceremonial and more practical. Sleek, matte, and clearly capable of stopping things more dangerous than awkward questions. Her hair was tied back, exposing the full arc of her ears. Jonah realized with a jolt that she was beautiful. Not in the fragile, delicate way of hollow stars, but in the way of someone who could build or break civilizations with the same level of effort. "Do you think this is a game?" she asked. "I think this is a wedding I wasn't invited to, a prophecy I don't believe in, and a culture I've offended at least 7 times this morning. So no, I don't think it's a game." She studied him. "Then you understand what's at stake." "Sort of. Half. Maybe a third. I'm still fuzzy on whether your people believe in metaphors or if everything really does explode." A flicker of something passed her face. It might have been amusement or indigestion. "The next trial will test your loyalty." "Already loyal to the idea of not dying. Does that count?" She didn't answer. Instead, she handed him a small device. It looked like a marble but pulsed like a heartbeat. "Place this in your ear." "Should I ask why or just roll with it?" "It links your thoughts to mine, temporarily, during the trial." Jonah stared. "So, psychic walkie-talkies." "Yes." "Great. Hope you enjoy the inner monologue of a panicking bureaucrat." She didn't smile, but she didn't frown either. As the device activated, a sudden whisper slid through his mind. Not words exactly, more like feelings wrapped in silence. She was there, just beyond the surface of his thoughts, curious, guarded, sharp as the edge of a broken promise. He whispered back, mostly for his own sanity. "This is very intimate for a first date." There was no reply, but something about the connection told him she'd heard, and somewhere, under all the ceremony and armor, she might have almost smiled. Almost. The second trial took place in a forest that wasn't a forest. Jonah stood at the edge of what looked like a dense jungle composed entirely of metallic flora. Trees clicked and shifted, leaves unfolded like solar panels, and the air was thick with the scent of ozone and unspoken legal liabilities. Somewhere above, artificial clouds shimmered with encoded patterns, raining data instead of water. It was less a wilderness and more a computer's fever dream of nature. Beside him, a small drone hovered with the persistent buzz of something underpaid and overconfident. "Welcome, Zeventel," it chirped in a voice that sounded like someone had taught sarcasm to a jellyfish. "This is the trial of loyalty. Your task is simple. Retrieve the heart fruit from the core grove and return it without compromise." "Sounds straightforward," Jonah said. "Where's the catch?" The drone paused, rotated 360 degrees for no reason, then replied, "Everything is trying to kill you." Ah, classic A map appeared in the air before him, a pulsing 3D rendering of the forest's internal architecture, complete with danger zones helpfully labeled with skulls, fire, and the phrase, "definitely not a shortcut." Jonah squinted at it, then turned his attention to the soft presence in his mind. The telepathic link with Sarava was still active, quiet but unmistakable, like a loaded crossbow wrapped in silk. "You getting this?" he thought. "Yes," came the response, cool and dry as shadowed marble. "Don't go left at the split. Because of danger? Because it smells like regret, and is statistically haunted. With that, Jonah stepped into the grove. The first few minutes were manageable. The plants rustled gently, retracted when touched, and only occasionally hissed in binary. But then came the flinch roots, vines that responded to fear. The more he worried, the tighter they coiled. Jonah froze mid-step, trying not to think about his tax backlog, his fear of flying cows, or that time he accidentally kissed the wrong diplomat's spouse. Breathe through your elbows, Sarava advised. That's not a human thing. Unfortunate species design. By sheer luck or stubbornly average reflexes, Jonah bypassed the flinch roots by pretending he was on a date with someone who hated fun. The vines, disappointed, slithered back. Further in, the terrain shifted. The ground was soft and uneven, whispering rumors through his boots. At one point, a flower tried to read his future. It screamed and wilted. Eventually, he reached a clearing with a tree unlike the others. It pulsed a deep crimson, surrounded by a ring of floating stones that rotated in lazy defiance of gravity. Hanging from one of its lower branches was the heart fruit, glowing faintly, shaped like a perfect teardrop or an unusually smug apple. He stepped forward. "Stop!" came a voice. Jonah froze. From the trees emerged three figures, humanoid, tall with long ears and armor etched in golden script. Their expressions were unreadable in the way that suggested they had strong opinions about etiquette and weak opinions about mercy. "You are not of the blood," one said. "Technically I am now," Jonah offered. "I'm prophesied. Got the matching neural bond and everything. It's very official." "You do not belong," another hissed. "I hear that a lot," Jonah said, then sighed. "Look, I'm not here to mess with your sacred grove or, colonize anything. I just need that fruit. It's for a trial, which, by the way, is turning out to be less about loyalty and more about not dying tragically." The third figure stepped forward. "To take the heart fruit, you must prove loyalty by sacrifice." Jonah frowned. "Sacrifice?" A second heart fruit dropped from the tree, landing near him. The figures stepped back. A test. One was real, one was false. Choosing wrongly might result in explosions, curses, or an inconveniently dramatic musical number. He reached inward, searching the neural bond. "Do you know which is real?" "I do," Sarava replied, her mental voice a low hum of certainty. "But I will not tell you. Seriously? You must choose. What if I fail? Then you were never loyal to begin with." He sighed. Loyalty was never about certainty. It was about risk, faith, trusting that someone had your back, even if you couldn't see it. He closed his eyes, reached out, and chose the fruit that smelled least like existential dread. The figures vanished. Jonah blinked, heart pounding, holding the fruit in both hands. No explosion, no curse, just a soft chime and a subtle vibration through the trees. "You chose correctly," the drone said, reappearing beside him. "Congratulations. Your odds of survival have increased by 12%. That's still not good. It's an improvement." On the way back, the forest seemed to part for him. No more vines, no more whispered threats, just an eerie silence and the distant, muffled sound of someone misplaying an alien trumpet. As he emerged from the grove, Sarava stood waiting. Her gaze dropped to the fruit, then met his. "You didn't ask for help," she said. "I wanted to," Jonah admitted, "but it didn't feel right. Loyalty's not supposed to be easy, is it?" She nodded slowly. "Number it never is." There was a pause, then she added, "Also, the fruit is mildly explosive if dropped, so good job not doing that." Jonah blinked. "You led with the psychic riddles but skipped the part where it could detonate? You seem confident. I tripped 6 times. And yet you survived." He handed her the fruit. She accepted it with both hands, her fingers brushing his. For a brief moment, something passed between them, not through the neural bond, but the old-fashioned way. A look, a beat of shared silence. The king's voice returned, amplified and sonorous. "The Zeventel has completed the second trial." "2 down," Jonah muttered. "How many are there?" 7, Sarava said. Jonah looked up at the clouds. "I really should have just sent a hologram." The fourth trial was held in a city that did not technically exist, at least not in the traditional, grounded in physics sense. It shimmered in and out of phase with the surrounding landscape, a construct of pure energy, layered memory, and whatever dreams artificial intelligences had when they overclocked themselves. Jonah was told its name, Velsorin, but promptly forgot it, as it was pronounced using a sound only replicable by creatures with 3 tongues and a deep understanding of particle entanglement. He stood at its threshold, staring at towers that bent sideways without falling, bridges that led to nowhere and then changed their minds halfway, and roadways that sang softly when stepped on. The guide, a cylindrical being with 9 arms and an unhealthy fascination with tax codes, handed Jonah a small black disc. "This is your task disc," it explained. "In the trial of insight, you must complete a series of bureaucratic maneuvers within Velsorin's legal structure." Jonah stared. "Bureaucracy? That's the trial?" "It is the most sacred tradition of our people," the guide said solemnly. "You must obtain a permit for the bonding ceremony. Without it, the union is invalid. This process may involve negotiations, ethical logic puzzles, and standing in line. Much line." Jonah glanced at Sarava, who stood silently just beyond the archway, observing him with that unnerving serenity of someone watching a kitten approach a treadmill. "Is this some kind of joke?" he asked through the link. "No," she replied. "This is how we filter out the impatient, the brash, and the truly unworthy. Only the clever and persistent succeed. So basically, it's a DMV from another dimension." "Correct." With a sigh, Jonah stepped into the city. Instantly, reality adjusted. Gravity rewrote itself into a suggestion. Colors blurred into emotional states, and several buildings attempted to greet him. One offered him a cookie. Another tried to sell him philosophical insurance. The task disc lit up, projecting a glowing arrow into the air. "Follow the path to the Registry of Conjugal Harmonization," it chirped. "Is there a registry of existential dread?" Jonah muttered. "Yes," the disc replied cheerfully. "It's 2 doors down." The first line he encountered was 27 beings long and included a creature made entirely of translucent nerves, a woman with eyes like shifting galaxies, and a sentient fog that only spoke in riddles and Yelp reviews. It took 2 hours to move 4 spaces, mostly because the being at the front kept trying to bribe the clerk with compressed starlight. Jonah passed the time by humming Earth tunes and playing mental ping-pong with Sarava, who, to her credit, stayed linked in. "Didn't expect a legal labyrinth," he sent. "Insight isn't about solving puzzles. It's about how you solve them, your instincts, your adaptability. Also, your ability to not strangle someone while holding a clipboard." "Indeed." At last he reached the front. "I need a Form Tive 117B, he said with forced confidence. The clerk, a levitating cube with one very tired eye, blinked. "Do you have your identification crystal?" Jonah frowned. "No, but I have this disc." "That's a suggestion tool. I need identity verification." Jonah paused. "Does sarcasm count?" "No." After 5 detours, a psychometric evaluation, and accidentally joining a short-lived political protest, he found himself seated before the overseer of harmony, a being too large to fit in the room, and thus present only as a shimmering outline in the ceiling. "State your intention," it boomed. "To file for union approval with Princess Sarava of House Altar," Jonah said, voice steady. "Are you aware of the psychological strain such a bond entails? The risk of cultural dissonance, spiritual fusion, and in-laws who can read your bloodstream?" "I'm from Earth," Jonah replied. "I've had Thanksgiving with Aunt Rhonda. I'm prepared." The overseer was silent for a moment. Then, "Your wit has been logged. Proceed to the test of shared truths." A new chamber unfolded. Sarava entered with him this time. They stood in a translucent sphere suspended in light. A console hovered between them. "The trial of insight requires one truth from each of us," she said quietly. "Nothing superficial. Something real. Something painful." Jonah hesitated. "What happens if we lie?" "We're ejected, and the bond is dissolved." He inhaled, then touched the console. "I used to pretend I was important," he said. "Back home, I'd tell people I worked for Galactic Relations. But I was just a logistics coordinator, moving containers, ordering replacement bolts, And I'd tell myself it mattered, that I mattered. The console pulsed. Accepted. Sarava stepped forward. I was meant to lead a war, she said, not a marriage. I was trained to rule, to conquer, to bend enemies until they broke. The idea of loving someone I did not choose, it terrified me. The sphere faded. The console chimed. You have passed. Back outside, they stood in silence for a long moment. You're not what I expected, she said. Neither are you, he replied. She nodded toward the city behind them. You handled Velsoren better than most. I'm still seeing colors that haven't been invented yet. Those will fade. Do I get a certificate? Number. But you're allowed to keep the disc. It beeped in his pocket, having quietly downloaded over 600 bureaucratic procedures for his future enjoyment. He decided to throw it into the nearest black hole as soon as possible. They walked back toward the palace in companionable silence, the link between them pulsing softly, not just with thoughts, but with something newer, thinner than trust, warmer than expectation. Maybe the next trial would kill him, but for now he was still walking. The final trial was held in the Hall of Echoes, a place carved from the bones of extinct stars and stitched together with the memory of forgotten gods. Jonah stood at the center of the chamber, surrounded by walls that flickered with images of his past, present, and potential future. The air buzzed with quantum tension, the kind that made your skin itch and your regrets start a barbershop quartet in the back of your mind. A voice, not entirely separate from the room itself, boomed down. You stand before the final gate, the trial of the self. To complete the rite, you must confront the one who knows you best. Jonah frowned. My mother? A shimmer in the air produced his opponent. It was him, or rather, a version of him. Taller, smugger, with better hair and the kind of posture that suggested he paid off his student loans and flossed daily. Ah, Jonah muttered. Of course, evil me. Classic finale. Not evil, the doppelganger replied. Just optimized. What are you? My potential if I made every smart decision? More or less. Do you have a yacht? Several. Jonah sighed. I hate you already. The trial of the self, Saraba had explained, was a confrontation not of fists or blades, but of perspective. One had to stand against their perfected self and prove they were worthy of the path they had walked, not because it was ideal, but because it was true. They sparred in words. Optimized, Jonah questioned every mistake Jonah had made, every failure to act, every embarrassing stumble, like the time he accidentally mailed a resignation letter instead of a quarterly report. The way he panicked during the forest trial, how he still second-guessed the feeling that had grown, quiet and warm, for Sarava. You're not ready to be royal consort, Perfect Jonah said. You're a misplaced logistics officer who eats cereal with a fork because he forgets to buy spoons. That was once, Jonah snapped, and I was very tired. You think a joke can hide your inadequacies? No, Jonah said, but it can remind me not to take myself so seriously that I forget I'm human. And being human, with all our awkwardness and shortcomings, is why I've made it this far. The hall vibrated. Perfect Jonah hesitated. His smirk faltered. I'm not flawless, Jonah continued. I'm not polished or impressive or particularly coordinated, but I'm honest. I'm loyal, and I love her. The final word echoed like a dropped pebble in an endless canyon. The double vanished, leaving Jonah alone. A moment later, the room transformed into the Royal Amphitheater. He hadn't walked there. Reality had simply decided he was done. The audience was already gathered. Delegates from a dozen star systems, tall alien dignitaries with fronds for faces, and one guy with 7 eyebrows and a loud shirt. The king stood beneath the spire of a cord, his voice projecting with gravity that bent sentences. The human, Jonah Rix, has completed all trials. He stands before us as the Zeven Tel, the chosen mate of House Eltar. Jonah glanced at Sarava. She stood radiant in ceremonial armor that made her look like the front cover of an ancient prophecy, and also someone who could kill you with her thoughts, which technically she could. You may speak, the king said. Jonah stepped forward, cleared his throat, forgot every word he'd planned, said instead, Look, I know I'm not what anyone expected. I didn't grow up in royal courts. I once called a warp ambassador bro. I don't know how to sword fight or hover in midair or negotiate with sentient fire. The crowd blinked in unified confusion. But I know how to listen. I know how to try. And I know what it's like to feel ordinary in a place full of legends. Sarava, princess, your world is vast and impossible, and I can't promise to fit into it perfectly, but I can promise to be there. Fully, honestly. Even when I mess up. Especially then. Silence, then laughter. It started with the king, surprisingly deep and resonant, and soon spread through the amphitheater. Not mocking, joyful, genuine. That, the king declared, is the first honest speech we've heard from a suitor in 3 centuries. Sarava approached, her eyes unreadable, her presence a controlled storm. She said nothing at first, just looked at him, long and deep and unnervingly quiet. Then she took his hand. I choose him, she said. I would rather spend a life tangled in imperfection than an eternity with someone who fears being flawed. The crowd erupted, not in the wild cheering of Earth sports arenas, but in the subtle, rhythmic chime of approval customary to her people. A musical gesture of consent, of union, of beginning. Later, after the ceremony, after the 6-hour feast and the entirely too intimate dance with a jelly-based dignitary from Tharn 5, Jonah and Sarava stood on the balcony of their new quarters. The stars spun slowly above, distant but familiar now. Do I get a title? He asked. Consort Pilgrim of the Fifth Accord, she said. That sounds like a ship. It's a diplomatic rank, also a ship. We're retrofitting it for your travels. I get a spaceship? You pass the bureaucracy trial. They stood together in the quiet, linked minds, sharing thoughts like threads in a tapestry. You've changed, she said. You have too, he replied. Perhaps. But I think I was only waiting for the change to begin. He wrapped an arm around her waist, still a little stunned by the journey that had led him here. From Earth's dull corridors to this place of strange stars and stranger customs. From obscurity to something like love. I guess this is where the story ends, he said. No, Sarava murmured. This is where it begins.